Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Pause. The central lie of the last 30 years was simple and convenient. Europe can behave like a geopolitical adult while outsourcing all real risk, all real power, and all real responsibility to Washington. Sarcastic security for free, moral superiority on top. That fairy tale ended the moment the United States wrote in black and white that it is done being the world's automatic bodyguard and that allies are priorities only when they stop being problems. Exhales sharply. From that second, every European electricity bill, every tax rise, every defense budget, and every conscription debate moved into a different reality. For decades, most NATO countries in Europe didn't even reach the symbolic 2% of GDP on defense, while enjoying the protection of a country that spent roughly twice that share year after year. The math was obvious. Europeans outsourced risk and cash flow to the US federal budget, then pretended this was smart strategy. And this is where the official story starts to fall apart. Because when Washington publishes a new security doctrine that quietly says, "We focus on our interests first, you deal with your own mess," Article 5 stops being a magic spell and becomes what it always was, a political decision, case by case, with price tags attached. You see the problem here, right? On paper, nothing dramatic seems to change. Treaties stay, councils meet, flags wave. In practice, one structural beam is removed from the whole building. The assumption of automatic American escalation if Europe's adventures go wrong. The problem isn't the goal, the problem is the plumbing. And the plumbing is broken. Let's strip this down to physics and money. Europe as a political project has roughly 450 million people, but no unified army, no unified command, no unified nuclear deterrent, and no coherent logistics chain for high-intensity war on its own continent. It has fragmented defense industries, overlapping standards, and procurement cycles that move slower than demographic decline. For years, this weakness was covered by one simple shortcut: the Americans will come. In short, Europe used other people's credit card for its security and then acted surprised when the bank started asking questions. Look at the basic constraints. Defense industries need time, steel, engineers, and predictable orders. Demography in most EU states is either flat or shrinking. Budgets are already squeezed by aging populations, welfare commitments, and debt service. Add energy costs that, after the 2022 to 2023 price shocks, never really returned to the old normal for heavy industry. Now, into this mix, you add a demand from Washington. If you want more troops, more equipment, more guarantees, you pay more and you carry more risk. This is the flaw you can't fix with PR. For years, European elites sold the story of strategic autonomy while closing nuclear plants, deindustrializing, and making their armies an afterthought. Politicians promised to defend European values at any distance, with any sanctions, on any front, while physically, they struggled to field a few brigades with full ammunition stocks. Politicians promised X. The physical system can barely deliver half of Y. If you're watching this from Germany, your reality is already different from someone in Portugal. Germany used to be the economic engine of the EU and the anchor of NATO in Europe. It still carries more weight than most, but its industry is squeezed by high energy prices and regulatory overload while being told to rearm, green its economy, decarbonize, and fund other people's wars at the same time. From the Baltic view, this looks less like solidarity and more like forcing one country to pay the bill for everyone's illusions. So, let's take a breath. Where does this leave us so far? The promise was, America pays, Europe lectures, everyone feels safe. The system can now deliver, America looks away, Europe pays, nobody really feels safe. And this brings us to the one number that changes the entire equation. That number is not in any glossy speech. It's the gap between what Europe would need to spend to defend itself seriously and what its societies can actually tolerate without political breakdown. If you total up realistic rearmament, stockpiles, logistics, industrial capacity, and sustained deployment, you are not talking about symbolic 2% of GDP. You're talking about 3 to 4% sustained for a decade in the richer states and much more pressure on the poorer ones. This number is the quiet part, said aloud. Here's where the theory hits a brick wall. European economies are already under pressure from inflation waves, higher interest rates, energy transition costs, and years of underinvestment in productive assets. Wages for the middle class stagnate. Housing is absurd in big cities, and SMEs drown in regulation. Now add multi-percentage point defense spending on top. What gets cut? Pensions, healthcare, subsidies. The same elites that spent years telling voters about social Europe now have to explain why social Europe comes with conscription, higher taxes, and fewer services. Officially, this is framed as shared responsibility within the alliance. In practice, it behaves like a delayed invoice for 30 years of free riding. From your corner of Europe, does this look like strategy or managed decline with better PR? Let's move from the spreadsheet to the map. For Washington, Europe is no longer the main theater. The gravitational pull is in the Indo-Pacific, China, shipping lanes, semiconductor chains, Taiwan, the South China Sea. The US wants flexibility, optionality, and room to deal with its own internal fractures, polarized politics, debt, social fragmentation, infrastructure, decay. From that perspective, Europe is not a noble crusade for democracy. It is a risk-heavy, low-margin asset that generates crises, not profits. The public rhetoric is about unbreakable transatlantic ties. The private briefings are about burden sharing and problem management. On paper, it's strategy. In internal documents, it looks much more like exit planning and risk reduction. And here, we hit the second unpleasant angle: mental habits in European elites. For decades, the easiest move in any crisis was to shout louder than reality, escalate rhetoric, and wait for Washington to translate speeches into tanks and missiles. That muscle memory is still there. The reflex is still punish, sanction, threaten, denounce. The structural environment is no longer willing to underwrite that behavior. Here's where the story stops making sense. Take the Baltic states. I live next door. I know the mentality. Local elites built their entire identity on being the sharp edge of the Western spear. Maximum rhetoric, maximum moral posing, minimal own capabilities. Year after year, they received hundreds of millions of dollars in various security, training, and infrastructure programs. Part went into real projects. A very comfortable part evaporated into consulting, coordination, and friendly pockets. Now imagine that the flow turns from grants into loans, and then from loans into nothing. Suddenly, those brave speeches about front line of democracy start to sound more like unpaid invoices. This hidden mechanism, does it change how you see the whole system? From a distance, the picture becomes even less comforting. You have a political structure in Brussels that has no real army, no independent intelligence, no unified energy policy, but enormous power to regulate, sanction, and moralize. You have member states with very different risk appetites. Some are willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. Others whisper about compromise. Others quietly sabotage sanctions while nodding in public. You have voters who were never really asked if they want to live in a high-risk frontline region of a new Cold War. Let's zoom out for a second. What we see is a classic imperial hangover. The Atlantic bloc got used to thinking of itself as the international community. Now, as the US pulls back and new centers of power grow, that self-image collides with reality. From here, all the options are bad. The only question is who pays first and who pretends it's inevitable progress. If you work in manufacturing or energy, you've seen this movie before. Management promises endless growth with lower costs. Reality brings supply shocks, price spikes, and clients walking away. Then one morning, someone important quietly leaves the board, and the real restructuring begins. The new US security doctrine is that quiet exit from the board. Europe just hasn't fully noticed yet. So what does this mean at the level of households and businesses? Start with taxes. Increased defense spending does not grow on trees. It either means higher taxes now, higher debt now with taxes later, or hidden taxes through inflation. Whatever path is chosen, it's the same pockets, families and productive businesses. This is the moment when an abstract PDF in Brussels becomes a line on your payslip. Then come energy and industry, a Europe that tries to be more militarized, more protectionist, and more green at the same time, with fewer external backstops, will pay more for every kilowatt hour and every ton of steel. Energy systems do not care about narratives. They care about molecules, electrons, and capex. If your power prices stay elevated, your factories either automate aggressively, fire people, or leave. This is when a strategic pivot turns into your factory's night shift being shut down. From this angle, does the official story still look convincing? The social side is no prettier. Conscription debates are already returning in several EU countries. Politicians try to package it as civic duty or modern service, but underneath it is a simple admission. Professional armies are too small, reserves are too thin, and somebody has to fill the ranks. So you tell one generation that they will pay more, work longer, retire later, and now also possibly serve in uniform because 30 years ago, their leaders preferred slogans to structure. Here's the part economists quietly fear. Social patience is not infinite. If you're watching this from Central or Eastern Europe, you live in the contradiction more sharply. Your elites built their legitimacy on two pillars. We are more European than Western Europe, and the Americans will protect us. Now Washington uses more careful language, and Western Europe is quietly tired of paying for everything. Where does that leave you? dependent on a Brussels that has no army and a Washington that has other priorities. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV. In the Baltics, the fear is simpler and more honest. They provoked a nuclear power for years under a borrowed umbrella. Now they're not fully sure the umbrella will open. In Southern Europe, the fear is different, that resources will be diverted north and east for rearmament, while youth unemployment and brain drain continue, and the only answer from Brussels will be more green transition resolutions. Different fears. Same structure. Your life is collateral for someone else's narrative. From an angle no one shows you, this starts to look very different. The end of automatic American protection doesn't just weaken Europe militarily. It exposes the fact that European integration was built on cheap energy, underpriced security, and free access to global markets under U.S. naval dominance. Take away those three pillars, and the elegant institutional architecture suddenly sits on air. There is one number in this whole story that nobody in Brussels likes to say out loud. We'll get to it. Before that, consider the psychology of elites. For decades, they could expand the project by promising everything to everyone: peace, welfare, open borders, cheap credit, endless enlargement, moral leadership, energy transition, digital utopia. Every time reality intervened, they exported the cost outward, onto future generations, foreign suppliers, external security guarantors. Now, there is nowhere left to export. The bill comes home. So here is that number. If you calculate the implicit subsidy Europe received from underpaying for defense and energy for 30 years, not in accounting terms, but as a structural advantage, you get something that looks like several full annual EU budgets over time. Not a nice clean figure, but a massive accumulated free ride. That advantage is gone. It will not be rebuilt, and this is why it matters. This is where the theory of European strategic autonomy hits a brick wall. True autonomy would mean real industrial capacity, real energy independence, or at least diversification that isn't suicidal, real military capability, and real political consent from citizens to carry risk. What we have instead is an elite that still speaks in the language of empire, sitting on the infrastructure of a comfortable province. From your corner of Europe, does this hidden side make you question the whole narrative? So where does this go? Most likely into a messy, drawn-out adjustment. Some countries will quietly hedge, building bilateral deals with the US, with the UK, with regional powers, just in case Brussels continues living in its own parallel universe. Some will flirt with neutrality or bridge roles, trying to sell geography and flexibility. Others will simply sink deeper into internal crises, blaming populists, foreign interference, or extremists, instead of admitting that their model is exhausted. For ordinary people, the pattern will be simple and boring. Higher bills, more security theater, more militarized rhetoric, less effective state capacity where it actually matters. More police at protests, slower ambulances, more speeches about values, weaker railways and hospitals. If this actually surprises you, good. That's the part nobody else bothers to show. In structural terms, Europe has been downgraded from co-manager of the system to one of several regions trying to protect their interests in a fragmented world. That is not a tragedy by itself. The tragedy is that its elites still talk as if they sit at the top of the pyramid and react with genuine confusion when nobody listens. If you caught the hidden angle here, good. If not, the elites are already billing you anyway. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids, systems do.